me. I think in the King James it just says, woman, why do you involve me? And when I first read that, and especially when I read it in the King James, I thought, is he rebuking his mother? And so we have to look at this word, and we have to think about the culture a little bit to figure out what Jesus is saying here. And if we flip through John back to chapter 19 near the end, John uses this same word, this same phrase to refer to his mother when he is handing her over to, when Jesus is handing her over to John while he's on the cross. He says to her, "Dear woman, here is your son." And he says to John, "Here is your mother." And Jesus uses the same word in chapter 20 when he bumps into Mary Magdalene in the garden after he's come back to life. He says to her in verse 15, "Woman, why are you crying?" And it's the same word. It's a word, a term of relationship. It's a term of affection, but not sensual. We don't really have anything that's equivalent in our culture. I think maybe 50 years ago, it might have been ma'am. Ma'am, why do you involve me? Today, I was at a coffee shop kind of wrestling through this week, and so there was a couple of ladies sitting on the other side of the long table at the Buzz, and I worked up my courage and I said, "Excuse me, ladies, can I ask you a question?" So I started out with this. I said, "You know that movie, The Princess Bride? Has anyone ever seen that movie, The Princess Bride?" Okay, a few of you. If you haven't seen it, you really do need to see it. Peter Falk is in it. Peter Falk played Columbo. You remember him? And then the young guy from The Wonder Years, the boy in that show, he played this little boy. And anyways, the movie goes on, and there's this princess and the guy and that whole thing. And Andre the Giant is in this movie. I mean, he's just priceless. He just plays an excellent part. And near the end, the princess is lost in the castle, and she's getting married to the wicked prince, and she really is supposed to marry Wesley. But anyways, Andre the Giant is sent to find this princess. And he's going through all the rooms, and he's getting lost because he's a big doofus, right? And finally, he sees her. And he just gets this big smile on his face, and he says, "Hello, lady." And it's just priceless, this term of affection. And there's nothing sensual about it. It's just, he's so happy to see her. "Hello, lady." And I think that word might fit here in this passage, lady. Or today we would, a term of affection or familiarity, we would just call a woman by her first name, wouldn't we? That wouldn't have happened in this culture. That wouldn't have happened in our culture several decades ago. But today we might just use her first name. And so Jesus might have said, "Mary, why do you involve me?" And why I say that is because what Jesus was saying there, when he didn't say mother, he said, "Dear woman." If he had said Mary, it would have been creating a little bit of distance between himself and his mom. He was saying to her, "You know what? I'm not your little boy anymore. I'm not your son in that way anymore. I've got to do what my Father tells me to do. For me to disobey you now is not disobedience, because I have to do what my Father wants me to do." And so in some ways, what Jesus is doing here is cutting the strings. He's cutting the apron strings. "Mary, what does this have to do with me? What does this have to do with us? Mom, my allegiance isn't to you anymore. It's to my Father in heaven. It's time to let me go. I march to the orders of someone else." Now, I'm not a mother, far from it. But I can imagine that giving up a son to adulthood is no easy task for a mom. Even when that son is following God. Even when that son is making you proud and doing all the right things. I'm sure that is not an easy thing. And yet, Jesus is helping his mom to let him go. And I would say to you as a mom, let your son go. Not all at once, by degrees, sure. I'm sure there's tons of ways, I'm sure, to let a son go, a daughter go. but to do that, to let them go. And for you, if you're a son, make it less difficult for your mom by making godly choices, by choosing to obey God and to follow Him. So that's some of what's going on here in verse 4. And then Jesus says, my time has not yet come. Is Jesus reluctant? Is He reluctant to be revealed, to come out, to show His glory? I mean, you think about Mary, she knows, right? She's been pondering all these things in her heart since Jesus was a little baby. She remembers the angels who came, and she remembers the shepherds and the wise men who came to worship. She knew. And we don't hear about Joseph after Jesus is 12 years old, and I think we can assume that he probably passed on. And so Jesus, the oldest of several children, we know that Mary and Joseph had other sons and at least one daughter. And so Jesus is the oldest. He's 12. His father's passed away, and he's got a single mom, and he's helped to raise these kids. And I'm sure there were times when he multiplied what was there. And so Mary knew. She knew, and so she came to her son, they've got no more wine. And she was expectant. She knew what he could do, but nobody else knew. No one else knew. And I couldn't help but think, is Jesus a little bit reluctant here in His humanity to come out and to show His glory, to blow His cover, so to speak? And when we look at some of the characters in the Bible, we see that often happened. Moses, Jeremiah, Gideon, and others, often reluctant to step out of obscurity and into the spotlight. Now, if Jesus had been a false prophet or someone who was full of himself, he would have been just eager to get out there, right? Like a magician or somebody. Yeah, I want to show people my talents. I'd love to take the stage. And yet I have found that those who are devoted to God and submitted to the Father hold back. They don't want to draw attention to self. And we see here and in many other places in the New Testament that Jesus performed his miracles not in front of the masses, but quietly in the shadows. Oftentimes He would take a family, and they'd go away from the crowd, or He'd shut the door. And He would do the miracle in secret rather than on center stage. And so here, even just a handful of people, a few of the servants, know what Jesus has done. Well, then Mary lets go. And she says in verse 5, do whatever He tells you. Do whatever He tells you. What is she saying? She's saying, you know what? Not what I want, but what He wants. He might not do anything. He might tell you to do something very unusual or strange, but whatever He tells you, do that. And what Mary has done has transferred authority and allegiance to Jesus. She's endorsing His authority. And for us in our lives, whether you're a single person, whether you're a mom, a dad, a grandparent, a married person, wherever you're at, we need to endorse Jesus' authority in our own lives, to do whatever He tells us. And then if we're parents, to endorse Jesus' authority to our children. We discipline them, we advise them, we encourage them, we explain things, we counsel. But all along the way, whether they're young or youth or even as adults, to make much of God's authority in the life of our children. To give God His proper place and authority in the lives of our kids. Do whatever He tells you. And so Mary has deferred to Jesus. If it's not time, then that's okay. But do what He tells you to do. Well, what happens? We know that Jesus gets right involved here. There's these stone water jars that are right there. Now, I wanted to bring up a bunch of coolers or a bunch of garbage cans or something to give you a visual of how much this was. I mean, it was 120 gallons. Can you imagine?